Hello all. Today I bring you not just a video, but a tale of two video games, broken Windows, and Linux. Part 1, the Great Console Port Rebellion. We start with the PS2 and bad PC ports. Now, you should know, the only way I even found out about this event was because of people complaining on Reddit. Google was no help at all. I had to call people to get more information, but I digress. In between 2000 and 2010, this event saw the release of some of the shittiest console to PC ports ever seen. We're talking Saints Row 2, GTA 3, and the other two we'll be discussing Deus Ex Invisible War and Prototype 1. But for now, yeah. I mean, they were so bad that a modder trying to fix Saints Row 2 got hired on to fix the game officially and died before he could finish. But why did this happen? I hear you ask. Well, to answer that, we'll have to go back to ancient times, the early 2000s. Playing on PC in the early 2000s was very different from how it is now, though mainly it was a lot of hard work. There is a link in the description if you would like to know more, have a better in-depth answer. But instead, here, I'll be concise. Having 64 megabytes of RAM and 22 gigabytes of hard drive space was considered a luxury, and 3D graphics and even graphics cards were new things back then, making game design harder in general. Not to mention, even installing and getting a game to work was more daunting of a task than you could expect people nowadays to do. Now that we've discussed the PC, let's discuss the console. After the defeat of Nintendo and the rise of the PS1, gaming had become more mainstream. We all know the PS2, just pop in a disc and you can play your games, your movies, and for so little cost. Just $299, better than the $1,000 plus you get with a PC back then. With this in mind, we can see the mindset of developers and why they would think PC is a dying platform. Sure, there are a few tryhards that game on PC, but the majority of people are on console. And so it was that the devs across the land regulated PC to an afterthought. PC ports suffered, partially from neglect and partially because of the differences between the platforms. The PS2 had set hardware, making optimization for games easy. Famously, GTA 4 used the CPU speed to determine game physics, meaning if you set your FPS above 30, the game and things that happen in it also sped up, causing wacky situations. The hardware was also weak. Games had to be designed with it in mind, meaning no large open areas, very little lighting, almost no shaders, etc. It also meant creative freedom was limited to what Sony would sell and what the console market would buy, causing devs to just play it safe. And so when devs decided to port over their games, zero fucks were given about the quality or even functionality of some of these games. And here are my best examples. Part 2! The first game we'll be looking at here is Deus Ex Invisible War. It's shit. Yep, just pure hot garbage. Looking online as to why this game is so hated is like asking people why they hate Hitler. They just sort of stare at you and are like, what fucking paradise alternate reality have you been living in? Then proceed to write a novel on how the game murdered their family and stole all the happiness from the world. But the best description I can give of why this game is so hated, it's the Cyberpunk 2077 of 2003, but worse. That's right. This game is almost 20 years old. But I hear you say the developers could always just remaster it or release a patch. To which I say, what developers? Ion Storm and the publisher Eidos went out of business in 2005. Yeah, that shit wasn't getting fixed then, and it isn't getting fixed now either. So we're all just going to have to live with mods. The next game we need to talk about is Prototype 1. It was a game made in 2009, published by Activision. Yes, that one. And developed by Radical Entertainment, both of which are still around. Unlike Invisible War, Prototype was and still is beloved by the community, and only suffered from general jank as well as a few bugs and glitches, but overall a great game. Now, I've been talking solely about how these games played back when they were made in the 2000s. But how do they play now? Well, if you have a 6-core CPU or higher, they don't. These games were designed with, at most, 4-core CPUs in mind. So if you try to play them, they crash, lock up your PC, and make you hard reset to fix it. Now, yes, there are guides online that tell you how to fix this issue. But even if you do, there is one other thing that prevents these games from running, and that's Windows. Yes, Windows itself prevents these games from running. Now, I know what you're thinking. The fuck are you on about? These games were made to run on Windows. To which I reply, Windows XP, not Windows 10. You see, Windows over the past couple of years that has gotten rid of code, old parts of its systems, or change systems in a way that make older games break or stop functioning. But even if you do get them working, they run like shit. But let me tell you, these guides, for me at least, weren't worth the trouble. So, what are your other options? Part 3, Linux versus Windows. Well, there isn't much you can do, really. You can either wait for a remake, try to fix the problem yourself, with things like GOG, Windows compatibility, or guides. But what I did instead of playing on Windows at all was use Linux. Now, I know what you're thinking. Damn it, another Linux video. But just wait a moment, because this is going to be a little different. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Proton by now. Proton keeps all the abandoned APIs, codes, and anything else games need to run, meaning older games work just fine in Proton is Linux only, and it isn't coming to Windows ever. This is mostly because Steam makes Proton and wants to get away from Windows. So even if they could, they won't. But they can't because Proton uses Wine, a Linux exclusive app that can't run on Windows. Well, what about emulation? I hear you say. Well, assuming the game you want to run works on your chosen emulator and you have a powerful enough PC to run an emulator, then sure, but you need a pretty beefy PC for that, making this irrelevant for people with a mid to low tier PC. But Proton lets you run old games on shitty computers just fine. Part 4, a warning. Microsoft has already removed even more dependencies. They have already gotten rid of 32-bit in Windows 11. Though they still have the 32-bit support, a lot of old games are going to have a harder time running, if not outright break. They're going to keep doing it. And if you want to play older games, Linux is about your only long-term solution. Windows 10 goes out of service in 2025, then you're either stuck with Windows 11 or you can leave, move to Linux, and no longer have to worry about your old games. Now, does Proton magically patch these games? No. Invisible War is still a hot mess, even if you can play it, but I can play it, and that's the important part. If you would like to learn more about Linux, I've linked some videos in the description. There's also a link to Pop! OS, my favorite flavor of Linux. One I highly recommend for anyone, especially beginners. Thanks for watching.